Okay, we're back. Let's see. Brother Darren, hello. Let's just give a couple of more minutes and get started. Sister Doreen, hello. Nice. Just 2 more minutes and then let's get started. Hello, my honey. I can see a couple more people also on YouTube. That's good. Let's 1 more minute and let's get started. All right. Amma, praise the Lord. Okay, let's get started now. Sounds good. So, of course, the module that we are in is End Time Prophecies, and we are right now in session 2. First session, we looked at the various models that exist. Hello, Brother Dinesh. The various models that exist in relation to millennialism and rapture and tribulation and so on. And we made some comments about them. There is a set of models that I haven't commented on, namely historicism, futurism, preterism, and idealism. But I'd be making comments on them in session 4, which is when we'd be looking at trying to see how we can establish the identities of different entities which show up in end time prophecies. Okay, having said that, let's jump straight on to this particular session. The purpose of this particular session is to survey mainly New Testament. The focus with this training today is not in the Old Testament. So we'd be mainly looking at New Testament text. But this session's focus is on surveying the text. Just, browsing through the kinds of passages that we'd be going through over the next couple of sessions. So essentially, people would gain confidence on how we come to conclusions in regards to prophecies. Now, just to set the background properly, there are plenty, like I said, end time prophecies is about bringing together, an end to Old Testament issues and New Testament issues, all issues. So before the end, the ultimate end comes, everything would be sorted, every account would be settled. And so clearly, Old Testament has plenty of prophecies, but today we're not going through them in detail. We're not going through them. As a matter of fact, more than the book of Daniel, we're not going through Old Testament prophecies at all. Although in terms of frameworks, frameworks mainly come from the New Testament anyway, apart from the book of Daniel. And so we'll be looking at all New Testament passages relevant in terms of end-term prophecies, and then on top of that, the book of Daniel. And I'll explain how precisely we use the book of Daniel. Okay, so with that brief introduction, let me show you on my screen all relevant New Testament passages that you need to know about when it comes to end-time prophecies. These are all that you need to know. So as long as you can study these in detail, and hopefully we'll be going through, I'll be giving a reasonable, structure. But once you get on top of these, essentially you're prepared, you're set to, making comments on end-time prophecies. Like I think I alluded to earlier in session 1, these are not for experts alone. God expects all Christians to be experts, and these are available in the New Testament text. Any Christian could read these and develop expertise. Of course, it's going to take maybe 100 hours of work, but I'd certainly encourage for all of us to get on top of this. Okay, just to go have a quick run through of the different passages. In the Gospels, there are 3 main passages in terms of frameworks. I'm talking about substantial passages. In terms of frameworks, 3 main passages, all corresponding to the same interaction that Jesus had with his disciples. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. Apart from that, of course, it's no prize for guessing that all of the book of Revelation, clearly Apocrypsis, a book of Revelation, revelatory book. So that's clearly the text that we need to get on top of. Apart from that, Acts chapter 1 verses 11, 12, Acts chapter 3 verses 20, 21, Romans chapter 8 verses 18 to 23, Romans chapter 11 verse 12, chapter 11 verse 15, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 12 on to 58, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verses 9 to 11, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 13 on to 5, chapter 5 verse 11, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 verses 1 to chapter 2 verse 12, 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 4 to 13, Jude chapter 6, Jude, not chapter 6. Of course, there's no chapter 6 in Jude. Jude, verse 6 and verses 14 and 15. So these are primary text. So if you need to boldly come to conclusions, of course you can refine conclusions, listen to others, reshape your views and all those things. Clearly, as Christians, we should be willing to do that. But for you to be reasonably confident, these are the things you need to care about. Okay, let me set my let me get the time properly. So we have begun at 1:15. So 2:15 would be 1 hour. Sweetie, would you let me know when we are 1 hour through? I might lose track of time. So these are the passages. Good. Apart from that, like I said, in Hebrew scriptures, plenty of passages, even some specific details about the potential antichrist and so on, the one person character and so on. But key is book of Daniel, because the book of Daniel would help. There are patterns revealed there which would help us unlock some of the details in the book of Revelation and so on. And so Daniel is an essential on top of New Testament text. Okay, having said that, let's just browse through these different passages. No, I'm not going to make significant decisions in terms of how we order things and so on, which we would do, I think, mostly next session is our ordering. And there we'll again see the natural ordering of the text would clearly, emphatically result in a post-tribulation premillennialism, i.e. historic premillennialism. We'd look at that. But so I won't be focused on making that kind of comments now, but just introducing the different texts just for us to have run through. Okay. All right. Matthew 24. So let's quickly go through, just quickly look at Matthew 24. So I'm going to do a fast read through and hopefully you can follow me. I may skip a few verses and jump and so on. Please bear with me. Matthew 24. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all of these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another, that shall not be thrown down. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming? So clearly, end times. Tell us, give us more details about end times. When will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of age? And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. By the way, as I read, don't be concerned about paying attention to particular details, in depth and so on, analyzing and so on. Just look at the broad narration, just so you have a rough grasp on the kind of text we are talking about. Let him who was on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. For the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day or and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. Two men will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household, to give food in due season? Blessed is that man, blessed is that servant, whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly, I say to you that he will come, he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And the reason I read the entire passage of Matthew 24 is very important, and that is exactly for the reason the Lord himself had this conversation with the disciples, which is, Christians, even if you don't read the book of Revelation, which I advocate against, all Christians should read the book of Revelation, whether you understand it or not. You should read. Just reading is very important, but I'll come to that in a bit. But before that, the point is, even apart from that, if you need a quick summary, it only took me 8 minutes, I think, to read the entire passage. Need a quick summary? The Lord himself has decided this is the summary that we absolutely need to know. Whether we know anything else or not is good. A revelation is very, very good. But even better, Matthew 24 or Mark 13 or Luke 21. Please read this. So just a quick couple of thoughts. So of course it's a simple enough narration of things that happen one after another. It's a sort of a chronological arrangement. Not necessarily strictly chronological necessarily. There is a bit of flexibility, but broadly chronological, as you can see. For example, first phase, there'll be all sorts of deceptions, pestilences, famines, nation against nation. But these are just the beginning of the sorrows, just the beginning. And then tribulation. Christians would be persecuted. Tribulation, hated by all nations. But don't worry. The only thing you need to worry about is to make sure you still have love. Love of many will grow cold. And you need to make sure you stand till the end. And the gospel has to be preached to the ends of the world. Okay, and after that, abomination, desolation. And the Lord clearly thinks that whoever he intends to read this should be wary of this. In Jerusalem, people who are in Jerusalem, in Judea, when you see abomination of desolation, run away, flee. Don't even, it's fairly serious. Don't even go into your houses. The moment you hear about abomination, desolation, run. Woe to those who, and of course, this is abomination of desolation. People at times would incorrectly attribute this to um, the AD 70 destruction of Jerusalem and Christians running away from it. This is not that. This is abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet. So Jesus refers back to Daniel the prophet in terms of making that comment. And if you go to Daniel, which we would do in some time, you would find out that this actually corresponds to actual absolute end, the absolute end, not 2000 years ago. Okay, so you see that, and then so abomination, desolation is really the great tribulation, and then what's in the abomination of desolation? So this is really in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem would be desolated through an abomination. So the temple in Jerusalem, which is supposed to be a very holy place, would have something which is meant to desecrate the temple. So this is of course based in Jerusalem, based in the temple, and therefore Jerusalem is the geographical center, Zion, Mount Zion, and Judea of course is the geographical center in terms of the country. And so abomination, desolation, which is at the center of great tribulation, is focused on that area. And then Jesus says, if anyone says, come here, Christ is here, Christ is there, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere, because there'll be many people who will perform great signs and wonders, but do not be deceived, because if possible, even the elect could be deceived. So immediately after the tribulation of those days, the Son, taste and see that the Lord is good. Yes, the temple is already destroyed, but I'll make some comments on that at the end, please. And then the more important, this is not the more important, another important thing to consider is that in nature, there'll be plenty of things that would change. Sun will be darkened, tremendous events. Sun will be darkened, moon will not give its light, stars will fall from heaven, powers of heavens will be shaken. And then the Lord would appear. When the Lord appears, all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And this is angels sounding a great trumpet, and then his elect would be gathered, and so on. And then the Lord goes on to talk about a couple of other things, by way of admonishing. He talks about rapture, and it gives further admonitions. That's Matthew chapter 24. Mark chapter 13 is very similar in nature. Luke chapter 21 is slightly different. Unless you pay attention properly, you would miss the difference. Luke is the only one who talks about AD 70 destruction. So Luke 21 has very similar content, very similar to Matthew 24 and Mark 13. There's only one very subtle difference, and that is here. Okay, so it begins similarly. Take heed that you're not deceived, for many will come in my name. You'll hear of wars and commotions. Do not be terrified. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilences. So in this regard, so far it's very similar to Matthew 24. But then this is the key difference. Very, very subtle. Verse 12. But before all these things, if you look at Matthew 24, it is after. But Luke 21, verse 12. Now, before all these things, so before end time begins, before the end begins, but before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you. It looks very similar to Matthew 24 otherwise, but this is before all these things. It'll turn out an occasion of testimony. Settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will say, and so on. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, some of you to death, hated for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. By your patience possess your soul. souls. And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that the desolation is near. It's not talking about the abomination desolation, which is technically a specific event in the book of Daniel, which is at the end. But here it's talking about a regular desolation. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, maybe what I'll do is I'll quickly also open Matthew 24, just so you can quickly see the subtle differences there. So the difference began in Luke 21 verse 12. Before all these things, verse 12, before all these things, and the difference doesn't end there. In regards to the description of what happens to Jerusalem, it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, the desolation is near, is what Luke 21 says. But if you look at Matthew 24, there it says, when you see abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, then flee. So two seemingly different events. There will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword. And then the other key difference is coming here. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. You see, at the end of this, what happens? At the end of the desolation spoken of in Luke 21, what happens is the dispersal of the nation of Israel, or the Jews. You will be led away captive into all nations, which happened in AD 70. After AD 70, you will be dispersed. And then what happens? Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. In other words, this is AD 70, after which Israel would be dispersed, and then Gentiles will trample Jerusalem for a certain amount of time. But if you look at Matthew 24, abomination, desolation, and then followed by, which would result in the great tribulation, such as not have been since the beginning of the world, and then which the days need to be shortened. So this is really the absolute end. If you hear this, here is Christ, there is Christ, don't go, because this is going to be followed by the coming of the Lord, not followed by the Gentiles taking over Jerusalem for their period of time. So Luke gives some subtly additional information which we need to pay attention to. Book of Revelation. Okay, so the book of Revelation, I'm going to quickly browse through. Maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll use my notes, which I was trying to use later, maybe now. So what happens with the book of Revelation? Again, don't be overwhelmed looking at the book of Revelation. I have given you a nice framework that you can go through. So if you look at book of Revelation, you would know, the first chapter or so describes how John meets Jesus. He sees Jesus, he sees, lambs, 7 lambs, 7 spirits, and that sort of initial sort of introduction to the vision context. And then chapter 2 and chapter 3, chapters 2 and 3 would be letters to different churches. These are churches which, if you read the text in a simple manner, these are churches that existed during Apostle John's time in the region of what we today would call Turkey. So John was supposed to write different letters. So beginning from chapter 4 would describe the view of heaven with the Father and the Lamb, God seated and then the Lamb. So it'll describe things about them and the fact that there are 4 living creatures and 24 elders, and how they fall down before the feet of the Father, and then later on feet of the Lamb also, and then sing their praises in different ways and so on. So you see those things in Revelation chapter 4. And then come Revelation chapter 5. From the chapter 5, you begin seeing some sort of a description of a chronology. So what I'm going to do right now is, what I'm going to suggest is, actually, if you go through some of the details there, you would find there are at least 3 different chronologies. I'll come to the specifics of that later, but let's now quickly browse through the book. So this is a quick browse through. Please bear with me. So Revelation chapter 1, I said earlier, it's a sort of an introduction. Okay, it's not easy to go to next from here. Or maybe I should just click on that. Sorry. Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3 talks about churches, different churches and the issues they had and so on. And then if you go to Revelation chapter 4, it talks about the throne room of heaven, and then God seated on the throne, and then subsequently you find the Lamb of God, which seemingly it's actually in Revelation chapter 5. You find the Lamb of God also introduced. And one thing which is being discussed here is, initially there is a bit of a despair in terms of finding out someone who is worthy of, removing resistance to events happening in the future, similar to what Paul talks about, the one who restrains. There is a despair in terms of finding out that there is no one to control the events. There's no one to open and let things happen in order, i.e. Open the seals of the scroll. And then they find out the Lamb is worthy of it because he was he had triumphed over what he was supposed to do. So the Lamb was a song of praise has been sung towards the Lamb. That's chapter 5. So now it's all ready. Revelation chapter 6, we begin seeing the different seals being opened. So I'll just quickly now run through some examples. First seal, the Lamb opened one of the seals. Who opens? Only the Lamb is worthy. Only the Lamb is worthy and is opening. And for one of the 4 living creatures, come and see, and I looked, behold, a white horse. On it had a bow and a crown. He went out conquering and to conquer. Similarly, second seal, another horse, fiery red, went out. It was granted to one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another. Third seal, black horse, pair of scales, with the rider of the horse having a pair of scales. And what seemingly happens is inflation. Essentially, it seems like food prices seem to have increased a lot. Fourth seal, death and Hades, pale horse, death and Hades. Power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. Fourth seal. Fifth seal, martyrs crying out, when do we get justice? Our blood has been shed. How are you going to get us justice? Sixth seal, cosmic disturbances. Sun became black as a sackcloth. Moon became like blood. Stars of heaven fell to the earth, and so on. This should ring a bell because Matthew 24 had something like this there. Then the sky receded as a scroll, and so on. The kings of the earth and the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave, every free man hid themselves in the caves and the rocks of the mountains, and so on. For the great day of his wrath has come. This is the first time in the book of Revelation. Remember, when we were talking about pre-tribulation, I made some comments about the wrath of God versus the wrath of the devil. This is the first time where the phrase the wrath of God is being used. As far as I remember, you can challenge me later, and we can see in the context if what I'm saying is accurate or not. But essentially what happened so far are things that ought to happen, not because God wanted to unleash his wrath, but essentially from here on, it's systematic wrath of God was going to begin to judge. sort of setting. So that's Revelation chapter 6. Let's move on to chapter 7. So what we find here, different seals. And then beginning from the seal, and now you begin seeing, two groups of people. One, 144,000 sealed from the nation of Israel. And then you find a multitude from all sorts of nations, tribes and peoples and tongues and so on. There is a subtle difference. These are described as still being on earth, standing at the four corners of earth. But these are described as standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Now, let's not take that too seriously, because again, we are Christians are already described as citizens of heaven. We already are asked to approach the throne room of God with boldness. We already told that the veil that separates us from the most holy place has been split already, and therefore Christians are already described as people who have access to the throne room of God already, even today. Let alone rapture or anything, even today. So today, for example, when you genuinely pray, when you deeply pray and so on, when you're really in the presence of God, the Bible would describe that as actually being in the presence of God, before the throne of God and before the Lamb, that sort of description. So that description should be taken with a pinch of salt there, in the sense of interpreting that in the wider context of the New Testament. Very important. So in other words, I wouldn't make a huge distinction between where the 144,000 were and where these people were. I simply wouldn't, purely because of the reasons I gave earlier. But the one thing I would say is that perhaps whereas these already know God, these perhaps don't know God already, but on their way to know God. They are already in a process of getting to know God, and therefore they have to be sealed in a particular way and so on. Anyway, so that's a brief comment there. And then in regards to the great multitude, they are being described as people who came out of great tribulation. In any case, these are people who came out of great tribulation. So in other words, these are not people who reached somehow heaven before the great tribulation, but rather these are people who came out of great tribulation, i.e. people who went through great tribulation and were there. So whether they were actually holistically in heaven, or they were still on earth but described as before the throne room of God, it makes only a very slight difference, not anything more than that. It doesn't point to the fact that these are people who raptured before tribulation, because clearly they were people who went through tribulation. Okay, so that's chapter 7. If we look at chapter 8, what you begin seeing now is in chapter 6, we saw 6 seals. Now comes the 7th seal. It seems like 7th seal is a second level of events unfolding. So with the 7 seals, you begin seeing trumpets blowing. 7th seal and trumpet 1, trumpet 2, and essentially the idea also is, if you remember with chapter 6, like I said, it's wrath of God. So anything that happens after that is basically, technically, clearly, without doubt, wrath of God. So okay, chapter 8, okay, 7 trumpets. First trumpet, vegetation struck, hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, thrown to the earth. Third of trees were burnt up. Second trumpet, living creatures in the sea died. Third of ships were destroyed. Third trumpet, waters became wormwood. Many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Fourth trumpet, heaven struck. A third of the sun was struck. A third of the moon was struck. Third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, likewise the night, and so on. So massive events over a few different trumpets there. Fifth trumpet, locusts from the bottomless pit. One woe is past. Behold, still 2 more woes. And these 4th, 5th, and 6th. Fourth, fifth, and sixth are called as the different woes that come from the Lord. So it says, apologies. Fifth, sixth, and seventh are the three woes, which are explicitly called woes from the Lord, i.e., wrath, unleashing of the wrath of God. And the fifth trumpet, locust from the bottomless pit, it's a bit of a detailed stuff happening there, but essentially an army which are described as locusts coming out of the earth. They are powerful. They are like scorpions. So they're described in that particular way. Who they are, their identity is the thing that we need to, study a bit more in a bit more detail. But at least you can see that they're described as locusts for now. And essentially, pre-tribulation rapture essentially seems to indicate the only way that you can be, you can escape the wrath of God is that you don't be there. Well, unfortunately, that's not what the book of Revelation talks about. For example, this is clearly part of the wrath of God, one of the three woes, ultimate, the great woes. But as you can see here, they were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth or any green thing or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So essentially only, in other words, essentially the point is people can still be on earth and not be harmed because God has a protective, let's say, insulation for these people. As long as the seal of God is there, these people would not be harmed. That's Revelation chapter 9. So pre-tribulation idea, proponents of pre-tribulation holding the idea, the only way you could be saved from the wrath of God is by not being there, is just simply ludicrous, not necessary according to scriptures. Okay, and you would see this in a multiple different ways in the book of Revelation. But having mentioned that, I'd also like to make one more point, actually, which I forgot to make. If you look at the number of people who are sealed in the book of Revelation, it has a technical loophole there. It says, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And it says, and I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. The technical loophole there is, if you read these two statements together, it isn't saying only these were sealed. It's rather saying, I got to know the number of those who were sealed. And by the way, the number of those who were sealed among Israel were 144,000. So we don't know how many more were sealed, is I guess my simple point. And that's not reading plenty between the lines. That's just saying that's how the statements are arranged here. I heard the number of those. Now, I don't want to, establish any massive doctrine or anything from there, but that's something I'd really like to point out to. Anyway, fifth trumpet, and then the sixth trumpet had to do with Euphrates, something happening in the river Euphrates where 4 angels were released, and then Euphrates being dried up, and essentially an army with about 200 million people actually fighting with horses, and horses were like the heads of lions and so on. So some sort of massive, like fifth trumpet, the sixth trumpet also has some sort of a massive battle happening. But the rest of the mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of their works, that they should worship demons and so on. Okay, so that's Revelation 9. So 2 woes past. Look at the third woe. Before the third woe, there's a little book. I did mention that there's even more sealing. So there's a little book which John comes across, and essentially he is advised not to reveal the contents of the book. And so this book is just sealed. Seal up the things which the 7 thunders are. So something happens, and the 7 thunders uttered their voices, but John was prevented from noting that down. So in other words, there are still hidden secrets in terms of even Christians. We still don't know some specific details, which John got to know, but not us. Anyway, so there's a interesting event that happens in regards to a little book. Now, guess what the final woe of the Lord is? Okay, I'll come to this two witnesses in a second. The final woe of the Lord is here, which is seventh trumpet, based on the seventh trumpet. And if you read through that, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of the Lord and of his Christ. The 24 elders fell down. So kingdoms have become, so that's the sort of the final state. 24 elders fall down before God on their thrones and so on. So that's, the nations were angry and your wrath has come, and the time of the dead, and they should be judged, that you should reward your servants, the prophets. So this is really the end. So what is the third woe? The final woe of the Lord, the final wrath of God unleashing? Well, very clearly and obviously, the final wrath is God's own judgment itself is the final wrath. Because based on the judgment, of course, you're not going to go on a holiday somewhere. Depending on where you end up in, things are going to be extremely terrible, worse than even great tribulation, clearly. And so that is categorized as the final wrath. But in any case, I'd like to point out to the fact that if you read the book of Revelation chapter 11, verses 15 to 19, you get the idea, even though it seemed like a chronological event so far, this seems to be really the end we are looking forward to. Not the eternity, but just before eternity, wrapping things up on earth, because, the kingdoms of the world have become the kingdoms of the Lord. There's nothing more to accomplish. And he shall reign forever and ever. And then, the time of the dead, they should be judged. Judgment, time for judgment. God's wrath in terms of judgment has come. Nations were angry and so on. Rewards for the prophets and saints are coming. What's my point? My point simply is this. Revelation, the book of Revelation is not one long chronology. It seems to have multiple chronologies. Chapter 6 on to chapter 11 seems to be the first round of, how we see things. And as part of this, there's also, towards the end, there are two witnesses. There's no mention of the fact that these are Jews, but there are two specific witnesses who testify of the God of the earth, and they are killed, and they go through severe threats in their lives, but then they are killed eventually. But before that, they exhibit spectacular power, but then they are killed, and then they rise up back alive. So that sort of thing happens in Revelation chapter 11. Okay, now if you move on to Revelation chapter 12, there is a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, a moon under her feet, and so on. This is clearly Israel, if you know anything about this figure of speech, or this way of seeing Israel, because if you read the book of Genesis as to what happened to Joseph, Joseph saw a few different dreams. And one of the dreams that he saw was that his parents and his brothers came and fell at his feet. Is one of the dreams that he saw. And the way he would describe that is the sun and the moon and 11 stars come and bow down before him. He talks about 11 stars there because he himself is one of the stars among the 12 people, 12 sons. And so the sun and the moon and the 12 stars together is what you would call the family of Jacob. Which is really the nation of Israel. And so the nation of Israel is seen as a woman here, and then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. Now, this is normally, sometimes, lazy evaluation, with a lazy evaluation, which happens in many places, unfortunately, people refer to this as the first birth of Jesus Christ, the birth of Jesus Christ. Well, Roman Catholics even make a very minor, very, very major mistake, very, very lazy mistake by saying this is actually Mary, which clearly it isn't, because this is that sort of figure of that sort of expression is used in regards to Israel already. And so you need to be extremely careful when you deal with expressions which are already used in regards to other entities. Now, secondly, the event that is being described here is not the birth of Jesus, but rather the resurrection of Jesus. Why do I say this? If you go through the Gospels, essentially before Jesus's crucifixion is, approaches, Jesus actually in the Gospels it describes events that lead up to the crucifixion as the woman who is in childbirth, where the birth itself is actually the crucifixion and mainly, more importantly, the resurrection of Jesus. That is the key event in regards to this nation. Israel essentially delivered that to the world. And soon after it delivered, of course, an enemy. So you'd find a couple of different entities here. A red dragon trying to chase the child. And then it talks about other children that the lady has. Why do I say it's not Mary? Well, for a few different reasons. One is the fact that it is that expression is used already in regards to Israel, and the other is clearly other children of this lady is being spoken of. I just need to find that quickly, but so clearly that's not Mary flying away in two wings of great eagle and so on. The dragon was enraged with the woman and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. Who are they? Roman Catholics have to swallow the truth that they clearly got this wrong. If it is Mary, they need to admit that Mary has other children. If it is Mary, they need to admit that Mary did not ascend up to heaven according to this. So clearly that those couple of things are wrong, because Mary is this entity is running away for life when the devil chased the lady. But clearly it's not Mary, because this is like I said, if it is Mary, they are wrong. Roman Catholics are wrong. If they are wrong, they are sorry. If they are right in this, they are wrong elsewhere. If they are right in identifying the woman as Mary, they are wrong elsewhere in saying Mary doesn't have other children and Mary has ascended up to heaven. But what I am saying is they are actually wrong here, and therefore they are wrong anyway. So the woman that is being spoken of is Israel, like I said, because of the expression already used, and also because of the other children who are being persecuted, and they are described who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Those are the ones who are seen as the offspring of the lady, who keep the commandments of God and have testimony of Jesus Christ. In other words, Christians. In other words, the point is the people the lady is giving birth to are disciples of Jesus, people who are obedient to Jesus apart from Jesus himself. The resurrection of Jesus himself, it's really the life of these Christians through refinement and persecution. Anyway, okay, so that's one important point to note. And there is the devil and Satan trying to persecute the woman, and of course the earth tries to help the woman, and so that's how they get to live for a certain more period. And in Revelation chapter 13, you again come across something else, which is a couple of other beasts. So one of the reasons I say with Revelation chapter 11, one iteration is over, is because Revelation chapter 12 begins with what appears to be first century events, clearly. And so you can't have things in the future which predate first century events. Revelation chapter 11 are things in the future when looking from first century, but Revelation chapter 12 is at the absolute start of the church, and therefore this can't post date what is there in Revelation chapter 11, and therefore clearly what was chronological until then is now broken. And now what I'm going to simply suggest is, it seems in the book of Revelation, the book has been written from a few different vantage points, from a few different perspectives. Perspective number one is, a simple church perspective. Revelation chapter 6 on to 11, where it goes through the 7 seals and then the 7 trumpets. Whereas Revelation chapter 12, chapter 13 are in regards to chapter 12, 13 on to, I'll let you know where, but essentially these are in regards to Israel as a nation versus the couple of different beasts that would show up and what would happen in terms of their struggle between them and so on. So you find in Revelation chapter 13, 2 different beasts being spoken of. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time now. So what I'm going to do is, two different beasts. The first beast is someone who is led to being worshipped. There is some compulsion to worship the first beast. And the first beast, if you look at the description, 7 heads, 10 horns, 10 crowns, blasphemous name. He was like a leopard, feet like the feet of a bear. And these are important things. Please remember this until we come to the book of Daniel, because some of these, for those who know the book of Daniel, should ring a bell already. It looks like a leopard, feet like bear, and mouth like lion. These are beasts which are already described in the book of Daniel. And that is why I said the book of Daniel is an important key. We're not going to look at how exactly we unlock this passage using that now, but I'm just browsing through and I want to point that out. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in earth. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. So great blasphemy, all who dwell on the earth will worship him. And then the second beast comes, and the second beast was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So this is the guy who performs signs and wonders. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, to receive a mark on their right, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. So this is the mark of the beast. And then it talks about the number 666. So what are these things? We need to really understand who these beasts are. Okay, we're still browsing through, so and I'm running short of time, so I'm going a bit fast now. Lamb, 144,000 people. So they are again being described. Now you see the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. So geographically, he is now on Mount Zion with the 144,000 people. So this would appear as if this is the standoff between the Lamb and the beast itself, the ultimate sort of Armageddon, where the 144,000 are even politically or militarily saved from the from a war that happens on the face of the earth. Okay, so a few other things happen, and now let's see. Angels proclaim Babylon is fallen. Now there is another character being described, Babylon. Now remember carefully, Babylon is not the beast so far. It's being described in a new way. There's beast 1, beast 2, beast from the sea, beast from the earth. There is the dragon, and now we come across Babylon. So Babylon is fallen and so on. And it still says, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image. This is from the wrath of God, wine of the wrath of God. So essentially, it clearly explains how one can escape from the wrath of God. One can escape from the wrath of God by not worshipping the beast and his image. Worshipping the beast and his image is really related to the wrath of the devil. If you look at Revelation chapter 12, you would see that the devil comes with his own wrath. The devil has come down to you having great wrath. That's what the devil was doing. And then, of course, if you look at Revelation chapter 13, it is the devil who is provoking those beasts to do what they're doing. So the way to escape from that wrath is by there are two different wraths involved here: wrath from the devil and wrath from God. To escape from the wrath of God, you just need to make sure you don't worship the beast and his image and not receive the mark. But you might still go through the wrath of the devil, because that's what the devil wants to do. All other children of that woman, he wants to persecute. And he has come to earth to do that. Okay. Revelation chapter 15. Now you begin seeing, okay, 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete. So now you begin seeing what the wrath of God is. So there are 7 last plagues. Revelation chapter 16, you begin seeing that as bowl judgments. 7 bowls of the wrath of God. So what was happening so far wasn't called the wrath of God. The phrase wrath of God is used in relation to taking the mark of the beast as an introduction. But now you are being described how the wrath of God is poured out. And there you see the 7 bowls. Like I said, first bowl, on earth, foul and loathsome sore came upon men who had the mark of the beast. How do you escape from this wrath? Just don't take the mark. You won't suffer from the wrath of God. Only the target for the God's judgment is on those who have the mark. Second bowl, sea. Third bowl, water. Why do I talk about this? Because if you compare what's happening with the bowl judgments, which are clearly described as the wrath of God here in Revelation chapter 16, with the trumpet judgments, which are also described as the wrath of God, the last 3 of which are called the great wars of God, you would see a similarity. The first one being on the earth, the second one being on the sea, the third one being on the river. You would see a similarity between that chronological event and here what appears to be a standalone chronology here. And so I'm going to suggest to you that there is a strong case for us to look at 2 different chronologies, where in one chronology, the 7 last wraths were described as trumpet-based judgment, and here it is being described as bowl-based chronology. And you see the 4th bowl, 5th bowl, darkness and pain, 6th bowl, Euphrates. I don't know if you remember when we came across the trumpets, I pointed out to the fact that Euphrates was referred to. And here you see the Euphrates again in a similar way. 7th bowl, ultimately, it seems, 7th bowl, verse 17, it says, it is done. Who says it is done? Not some Tom, Dick, and Harry who doesn't know what was happening, but an angel pouring out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven itself, God's own seat, and it says, it is done. So chronology number 2 is over. I remember I said I'll let you know when chronology number 2 is ends, and it seems like it is here in Revelation chapter 16. So chapters 6 on to 12, chronology number 1, 11, chronology number 1. Chronology number 2 begins with the introduction of the nation of Israel, 2 different beasts, chapter 13, and then it goes on to talk about the 144,000, and then it comes on to the bowl judgments, chapter 16, and here we seem to see another end to the narration. There were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such a mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth. And now the great city was divided in 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Everything was settled, and great Babylon was remembered before God. So the only thing which was pending was in terms of Babylon. What's up with Babylon? To give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of the wrath. And then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. So now the only thing pending as far as this sequence goes is Babylon. So enter chapter 17. You begin seeing Babylon. Mystery Babylon, sitting on a scarlet beast. 7 heads, 10 horns. Chapter 13, first beast, 7 heads, 10 horns. And these both are the same beasts. Even though they are described in slightly different ways, I'm going to tell you these both are same. and I'll explain why they are both the same. But here, clearly, my point is now we are going to begin seeing another, not chronology, but another sort of, little summary of events. And this time, the perspective is how Babylon is going to be destroyed. The previous time, it was what was going to happen with Israel, and then the two different beasts. But now it's Babylon. Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and abominations of the earth, who drunk. Now this Babylon has been from time past. This is Babel, starting from there. And this Babylon relates to, if you read chapter 17 and 18, what you would find is it'll describe to you how this Babylon, in chapter 18, this Babylon is going to be burnt up. That is the judgment by the 10 kings. The 10 kings who prop up the first beast, the beast from the sea, described in Revelation chapter 13. And what you find in 18, you'll find that this Babylon, if you need to identify who Babylon is, which we would briefly look at anyway in session 4, is that this Babylon corresponds to trade, because she was burnt up, and what was an immediate consequence of the fact that she was burnt up was that every trade, global trade, came to a standstill. And the merchants of the earth will mourn, weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind. So global trade comes to a halt when this Babylon was destroyed. Alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and so on is gone. Now, every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, "What is like this great city?" They're even seeing how this destruction was unfolding in front of their eyes, and goods that were in transit, people who were who were transporting goods, as goods were in transit, they stood, because global trade had come to a very abrupt stop, and they were looking at Babylon. So that's how Babylon was destroyed. But the key part is Revelation chapter 17 actually goes on to describe what the 7 heads and the 10 horns in the scarlet beast is. It goes on to clarify precisely. 5 have, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, and the other has not yet come, and so on. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. So it goes on to describe who these 7 heads are, and it'll go on also to talk about the 10 kings, the 10 horns. The 10 kings, 10 horns, who would actually prop up the beast at the end. And that is why the beast himself, of course, the beast is described as someone with 10 horns. So you see that in Revelation chapter 17. Now, I still haven't explained why the beast here, scarlet beast, is actually the beast from the sea in chapter 13. I haven't explained that so far, but we looked at chapter 18, and that talks about the judgment of Babylon. Now, let's look at chapter 20, because there is the key to unlocking the idea that so 20, 21, 22, with 20, we are now looking at the judgment of devil. Before the judgment is bound, judgment doesn't happen immediately for him. He is tried, and there is another war that happens, Gog, Magog. So those things happen, and then eventual judgment. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are. If you go to chapter 19, where it talks about the destruction of Babylon, it'll go on to talk about the fact that the beast and the false prophet were also put into the lake of fire. Now they are being described again. The beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night. Now, and then judgment happens. I think it is in maybe chapter 21. Can't remember where exactly, but not here. Okay, 1 second. So essentially, in one of these chapters, it'll actually go on to describe the beast and the false prophets are the ones that correspond to chapter 13. Okay, it's in chapter 19 actually. Sorry. Okay, so beast, the same idea is used here. Beast, the same expression, beast and the false prophet, where the beast corresponds to the scarlet beast, and someone is described as a false prophet who goes with him. Revelation chapter 13, you talk about two different beasts. One is this guy, beast from the sea, and the other is this guy, beast from the earth. Because it goes on to clarify who worked signs in his presence. The false prophet worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and who worship those his image. So of course, if you look at the chapter 13, this guy is the one, this is the guy who is the beast from the sea, beast from the earth, who would deceive through signs and wonders on behalf of the first beast. So so all those things happen now. Okay, so what we've done, we've gone through the book of Revelation. Now, I've seriously run out of time now. So what I would do right now is simply point out to the other passages here. You can, so the other passages here are very short passages. Maybe in 1-2 minutes, I'll just, show some of these. But essentially, this same Jesus who was taken up will come so in like manner. Acts 1, chapter 1, verse 11. Whom heaven must receive until the restoration of all things. Acts chapter 3, verse 20-21. Romans chapter 8, I'll skip. Romans chapter 11, I'll skip. But you can please read the handout given to you later on. But Romans chapter 15 talks about resurrection, and then it clearly talks about Christ the first fruits, afterward those who are Christ at his coming. So it talks about resurrection happening in two phases: Christ the first fruits, the resurrection of Jesus himself, and afterward those who are Christ at his coming, at Jesus' coming. And then it'll go on to talk about, and then the end comes. So it describes one coming and then a resurrection during that time. It talks about how rapture, how the translation of human beings happen, to our resurrection bodies, incorruptible. So you can go through that. That sort of information is found there. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we talks about the trumpet, the Lord himself descending, and so on. I'd be using some of these in the next session, but I'm not reading this right now. I'm going to skip some of these because I've run out of time now. We need some time for Q&A. 2 Thessalonians. So what I'm going to do right now, so 2 Thessalonians, of course, we went through that a bit in our previous session. What I'm going to do right now is something very simple, which is Daniel chapter 2. I said Daniel chapter, Daniel is a key in terms of understanding some of these passages. And what you find, I'll just give you a simple idea. In Daniel, you might remember if I mention something like, there is a dream that Daniel has to interpret. And in the dream, he sees an image. Nebuchadnezzar would have seen an image, and Daniel now explains to him what the meaning of the dream was: gold head and so on. So that sort of dream, that dream actually takes us to the end in terms of timeline. 10 kings at the end, 10 toes, clay and iron, and so on. So it takes us to the end in that regard. Similarly, Daniel's chapter 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All these chapters have very important information, either in terms of helping us understand how we unlock some of the codes in the book of Revelation, or also giving some details which actually correspond to end time events themselves. So in other words, either they give old information that correspond to before Christ's time, or they give Anno Domini period, things related to Anno Domini. In either case, very useful for us to unlock some of these prophecies. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to close this session. That should give you a rough idea of the kinds of passages we are looking at. We went through the book of Revelation in a reasonable level of detail. Next session is really when we put these things together. And what we are going to do is that we are going to find out, when we put these things together, there's a particular chronology, and that is what is called historic premillennialism, which is really post-tribulation premillennialism, i.e. There is a persecution. Israel went through a persecution at the start of Christian age, which is in the 1st century. And then towards the end, we begin having sorrows again. And then there's tribulation, and there is the start of Great Tribulation. There's Great Tribulation, signs towards the end of the Great Tribulation, signs in the sun and the moon and so on. And then the Lord returns back, and then millennial rule, white throne judgment, new heaven, new earth, eternity. And we're going to find out how this precisely is. Okay, with that, let's close this session and open up for Q&A. Questions? Anyone, please? Taste and see that the Lord is good, says abomination of desolation. I think I've answered that already, which is really in Jerusalem, the temple in Jerusalem having a blasphemous event happening. The temple is already destroyed, though. Yes, true. So the temple has been destroyed, but the thing is, if you study the pattern of prophecies in relation to the temple, the Lord would actually at times would refer to the temple even when a temple didn't exist, because he knows that it would exist in the future. For instance, even when the first temple was destroyed, and before the second temple was built, there was a prophecy, was completed. There was a prophecy which goes on to talk about how the second temple would have the glory of God in a much more manifold way than the first temple. But the second temple didn't exist at that time of the prophecy. But the prophecy was still given because God knew that that temple was going to be built. He was somehow going to lead people to build it, and therefore he gives that prophecy. Likewise, clearly a temple is needed for the prophecies, end time, for some of the prophecies we are looking at to be fulfilled. And therefore, who is going to build, how, I don't know. But what I do know is that the temple is going to somehow show up. Okay, taste and see the Lord is good again says, could the captives mentioned here in verse 20 also be referring to the lost tribes of Israel that have still not been found, i.e. all tribes of Israel rather than just Judah? What did I talk about captives, sweetie? I'm sorry, I'm losing context here. Sister Mala says, do I mean a physical temple? Yes, I do. Okay, I'll come to that captives in a bit. Maybe you're talking about 144,000. No. Oh, no, are you talking about... No, I'm really not sure. Please clarify what you mean by captives. Unfortunately, I wasn't keeping track of the chat when I was going through the session. Okay, the next question. Do you think we have had any seals open already? If so, where are we in the end times? That's a very good question. I think some of the seals have been open already. And in my view, but of course I need to justify, in my view, you would see in the next couple of sessions where I would be very confident about some things. in terms of some level of detail, I would be very confident about. And then I'd be saying, in regards to some other details, I would be saying, wait, we need to wait and watch. There's no better way. There's no better way. So you would see what I mean when we get to that. But in regards to the seal, my take is, I think we are, if I remember correctly, I think we are in the fourth seal, or entering into the fourth seal. To me, it seems like even things like COVID-19 seems to be a prelude to the fourth seal. If I remember correctly, the first seal corresponds to war. So if you look at the chronology of events that happened after the time of Jesus, you find, territorial wars happening, right through the Roman Empire period, territorial wars. And then the second seal corresponds to, the third seal corresponds to inflation, food inflation, because of lack of producing. The second seal corresponds to global conflicts. The first seal corresponds to conquering, expansion of territory. The second seal corresponds to conflict between nations in unprecedented level. And that to me seems like, the world wars and so on, where different things were coming head on head. When the period of the expansion of the empire was over, now it was all conflict, fighting with each other, sort of period. So that's the second seal. Third seal, the food inflation. So take what I'm saying. In the things that I'm saying, I only have a working idea. This is my working idea so far. This is not one of my, I'm 100% confident about this. What I'm 100% confident about, I would be speaking about them. I'll be mentioning that in the next session. And for example, I'm 100% confident the tribulation hasn't begun and so on. But I come to that in the next session. But for now, I'm not 100% confident, but I have a working definition. To me, it seems like we would be entering into fourth seal now. I don't know when the now is, but it's essentially a period of, calamity across the world, where people are going to die left, right, and center because of all sorts of reasons, diseases, battles, animals, and so on. If you read the fourth seal, I think that's where we are. But I leave that at there. I mean, if someone else has a better view, I'd be willing to hear, but I would need to correspond that to the details in the book of Revelation for me to say, yes, I agree with that, or no, I don't agree. And here is the beauty. Book of Revelation, please certainly get on top of the Gospels. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. You need to know them. Absolutely. Of course, you can go around, without knowing anything. That's what you want to do. If you're someone who wants to know some things, I would say the first thing that you really need to know, Gospels. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. On top of that, what I would advise in regards to the book of Revelation, my first advice would be, it doesn't matter if you understand or not. Doesn't matter at all. Please just read. The reading itself is going to be very, very useful. Why? As events unfold, God can speak to the faithful and say, this is what I meant in that particular place. I've seen dreams and visions from God where I have seen similar things God doing. And so if you really want to be faithful to the Lord, please at least read. It doesn't matter if you do not understand anything, but show your sincerity to the Lord by reading. And Revelation chapter 1, I think actually, I can't remember if it is chapter 1. I think chapter 1 or maybe 2 promises a special blessing, 3-level blessing. It will talk about the one who reads, the one who listens, and one more, I can't remember. And so I certainly advise on that, even if you don't understand anything, because retrospectively, you can get to know. And when I say this, I'm not being a silly man in advocating some level of illiteracy of some sort. No, I am actually advocating godly behavior based on past experience. When the Lord came the first time around, not even John the Baptist had the clue as to how to interpret the Old Testament prophecies to clearly have this idea that this is the Messiah. All that he knew was that the dove came upon him. That's all. Rest of the stuff he didn't know. None of the people knew. When Jesus came first time around, none knew how exactly the Old Testament prophecies were fulfilled for the first time around. They didn't. Jesus had to teach them, and only then they got to know. But they had a rough idea with which they could work. When Jesus taught, of course, Peter had to know a little bit. Oh, yeah, I remember reading that and so on, to taking that seriously. And that is what I'm advocating now. At least read. The sincere ones the Lord can speak to. We have a living God. We're not talking about some philosophical discussion and so on. And so I don't therefore like simple secular apologetics. We are Christians. God can speak to us. God can work signs and wonders. So please do read. That's a long answer to your question. Taste and see the Lord is good, but I hope that I've answered that. Okay, Brother Rudy, hello, Arul. It is early over here. Just woke up. Yes, praise the Lord. Very good to see you, brother. John, 7th day. Very good to see you, brother. Arul, I have placed a comment in your previous video regarding the Sabbath and responding to your arguments. John, you can place any number of arguments. I saw, I think, all the arguments you placed. I can say that you're not advancing anything new. It's all standard Seventh-day Adventism arguments. And my point simply to you is going to be Seventh-day Adventism is heresy. And it's clear without even me having a conversation with you, because I've done my homework on this. And therefore, I can, without having a conversation, confidently say preemptively that it is a heresy. And so if you want to have any discussion, I'm willing to have, but time and place I don't know. So you can drop me an email. We can work out and try and see through God's grace when we can have that discussion, if we can have that discussion, depending on your attitude. If you're a typical Seventh-day Adventist who is just going to sing the same song from the songbook over and over again without listening, then we can't advance in any conversation. But I do hope that maybe you won't be like that. I really am looking forward to your email. Sister Mala says, a very interesting topic. Physical temple, yes. 144,000 is not just the Jewish tribes. Yeah, not just Jewish tribes. Apologies if I ever said only Jewish. I meant Israel as a whole. Please explain all these seals. No, not yet. Okay, I am going to now, over the next couple of sessions, focus on the things I am really absolutely confident on, and the other things I only can provide a working definition, not a confident set on stone idea. Brother Rudy, we'll have to review this session again. Lots to digest, but happy to rewatch. Sounds good. AOC Network says we are in a decade reaching the Christ coming. I don't know what AOC is. Okay. Are our days going to be worse than? Okay. Read, listen, and obey Revelation chapter 1-3. Amen. Don't try to understand, the Lord says. Huh? Some reading sessions. Brother Rudy, I think you're referring to me when you said maybe you could lead some reading sessions. Absolutely, that's a very good idea in terms of end time prophecies. I think what we could do through God's grace is that maybe off the back of this, we can have several reading sessions, perhaps, like a study group reading sessions, have, something like maybe 10 days. So, allocated. I'm speaking to my wife as I'm speaking to you, so we can yeah, Brother Rudy, I think that's a very good idea. Let's try and do something like that. Okay. Okay, that's all for now. We have run out of time. Any more question? Eugene, did you have any question here? No? Okay, sounds good. Any more question, or we've run out of time already, actually? Were you going to say something, Eugene?
No, I was just checking I was on mute, but yeah, no, it's overwhelming, a lot of stuff, so it needs to be examined. Like, for example, the seals, I want to go back into the actual scriptures to see the different seals, but I prefer to
Eugene, your voice is breaking. Eugene, apologies. Your voice is breaking, and I don't think we are live streaming you now. Your voice is breaking. Okay, and we have run out of time. So what I'll say is simply this, which is that please don't focus attention on, for now, please don't focus attention on things which I haven't focused attention on. Please stay with me in only looking at the things which I'm looking at in great detail. Seals and so on, I'm skipping through because I really want to set some of our reference points properly. And please stick with me on that, please. So we still have a couple of more sessions today to answer Brother Rudy. And let's do that. So now let's, Eugene, apologies, I cut you short. We lost contact, but let's close here.
The connection wasn't good. My connection, I dropped at one point. I dropped. Yeah,
okay,
the connection
okay, no
wasn't
problem.
good.
Okay, so we will stop here, and we only had 12 minutes to 12 minutes, and then we regroup. Thank you.
All right.
New YouTube link and new Zoom link for third session. We have 2 more sessions coming up. Thank you, Sister Mala and Brother Rudy, for the congratulations. Thank you. Okay, speak to you next.